Good afternoon. I'm Julie Gunlock, Director of the Independent Women's Network. More than a week after Hamas terrorists rained thousands of rockets down on Israel and infiltrated the country by air, sea, and land in an unprecedented surprise attack. The region is at war, and there are widespread fears of a wider conflict. The attack by Hamas on Israeli civilians started in a sneak attack on the morning of October 7th, when thousands of armed Hamas terrorists breached a border security fence and indiscriminately gunned down Israeli civilians and soldiers. Other terrorists arrived by motorboat and some by air and paragliders. We know what happened. Women were raped, children were killed, babies were beheaded, people just living their lives were hunted down and murdered, burnt alive in their safe rooms, killed trying to escape. Whole families were wiped out. Many were tortured before being killed. According to Israeli officials, roughly 1,400 people have been killed in Israel, including children. 3,400 have been injured, and somewhere between 200 to 250 hostages were taken by Hamas to Gaza. There is very little information on the hostages there, their whereabouts, their condition, nothing. Thousands have been killed in Gaza in the subsequent fighting, many of them children. To talk about the terrorist attacks on Israel, Americans' role in the conflict, and what we know and don't know, and there's a lot we don't know about the conflict and the current situation on the ground in Israel, I'm joined by Dr. Meaghan Mobbs. She's a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Dr. Mobbs graduated from West Point and went on to earn her doctorate from Columbia University. She's been a Tillman Scholar as well as a George W. Bush Veteran Leadership Scholar. She currently serves as a gubernatorial appointee to the Virginia Military Institute's Board of Visitors. I'm also joined by Ellie Kohanim, I'm sorry about that, also a senior fellow with the Independent Women's Forum. Ellie serves as U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism at the U.S. State Department during the Trump administration. She was the State Department's first Iranian-born Jewish envoy and led diplomatic initiatives resulting in historic breakthroughs in the Muslim world. Ellie arrived as a child refugee to the U.S. after she and her family fled the escalating anti-Semitism in Iran during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Quite a story. And lastly, but not least, Dr. Qanta Ahmed. She's also a senior fellow with the Independent Women's Forum. Dr. Ahmed is a physician, a nonfiction author, and a broadcast media commentator. She was the first physician, the first Muslim woman to be awarded the Templeton Cambridge Fellowship in Journalism at the University of Cambridge. Currently, Dr. Ahmed is a triple board-certified pulmonologist and sleep disorder specialist, and she became an American citizen and now maintains British and U.S. citizenship. Ladies, such an impressive resumes all around. I'm so thrilled that you could join me today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Julie.
Qanta, I'm going to actually ask you to speak. You're actually in Israel. You're in southern Israel right now. You just landed, I believe. Why don't you tell us what your plan is there, what you're doing there, what your mission is, and anything that you've heard since you've landed there in Israel?
Yes, it's a great pleasure to be able to speak to you. I'm at the moment in a vehicle with wonderful Israeli friends, Gali and Ayelat. Gali's at the wheel. We're on the Rabin Highway through the Negev Desert, heading down towards that part of Israel which was impacted by these atrocities. When they occurred and I saw the news that night, I knew I had to write something about this as a Muslim that combats radical Islam. This Islamist assault, this genocidal atrocity that's been perpetrated with the absolute unmitigated intention of eliminationist anti-Semitism. That's what this is, this kind of jihad. It moved me to immediately write about this. You've been astounding at opening up opportunities for me to broadcast about this. And in the first few days, I contacted a very dear Israeli friend, a former Gaza Deputy Division Commander, Kobe Vela, who took me into the Hamas tunnels about 5 years ago in September 2018, and checking on him to find whether his family was okay. In the 2 or 3 days later, he suggested if I wanted to see how the situation really was, he could open doors. And I decided, after careful thinking, to come here. What we're planning to do is we will reach the home of Gali and Ayelet in about an hour and stay there. That is an area which is still under threat. There is a civil defense system and one IDF unit that is helping protect that area. In the morning, we will go with the IDF to the places of the atrocities, to the kibbutzim. And my intention also, not only as a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, but also as a lay member of the USC Shoah Foundation, is to begin bearing witness. I'm intending to film that. When we meet survivors or witnesses who give consent and wish, we will be collecting testimony, and that testimony will go into the archives of the Shoah Foundation. This is eliminationist anti-Semitism. This is a absolutely mortal threat to the Jewish people and the state of Israel, but also all humanity. And I think as a Muslim, it's extremely important that I'm seen to bear witness, because I'm noticing even educated Muslims in my own social circles are already denying the reality. That's one. The other activity I'm going to do is leave from here and with the idea to go to the Dead Sea, where the survivors of the atrocities are now housed in temporary accommodation, grieving their loved ones, completely dismantled from their homes and lives, beginning to bear witness for them. I will also engage with my medical relationships at the University of Technion, where I'm a fellow, and learn about the medical response. Other Israeli friends are asking me to come and look at the psychosocial response. There's an entire psychological support system that's being developed. Yeah. There's also a support system for the soldiers. I'm going to see as much as I can. One thing I very much want to see, it's all just published recently in the Times of Israel, is the forensic center in Jaffa, where the remains of the fallen and the martyred victims of this atrocious Islamist jihadist attack are being studied. And because there is so much disbelief about this, not only amongst some Muslims, but many others, I think I want to be seen to be bearing witness at that level. So that's my intention. We'll see what permissions and opportunities I'm able to get. And thank you to the IWF for supporting me in every way possible.
Qanta, that is amazing. And we look forward to your dispatches from the area. It's going to be very difficult, so our prayers also go with you. I want to switch over to Meaghan and ask about the president's visit. He just got back to Washington, I believe, last night. Do you view the president's trip to the region as a success? Was it a successful trip? And what do you make of the $100 million that the Biden administration has pledged in humanitarian aid to Gaza? We know that that Gaza is ruled by Hamas. Hamas often steals any kind of humanitarian aid. It never makes it to the people. So what do you make of that? That incredible investment to an area that, again, is ruled by terrorists?
Thanks, Julie. And Dr. Ahmed, thank you for all the work that you're doing on the ground, bearing witness and communicating back to everyone in the IW family, ensuring that we all have relevant and up-to-date information. I think that's such a critical portion about all of this, because as Julie mentioned in the introduction, I think there's so much information out there that people are then taking and extrapolating and drawing conclusions that I don't think are always the best, even for our mental health sometimes, because I think we can get drawn into being very fearful about the situation, which I'm sure we're going to get into. But Julie, to your question, I think the unfortunate reality, and I think all of us as Americans want America to look strong on the world stage. We want our president, no matter who it is, to look and to project that strength. Unfortunately, Biden was appearing in Israel to be a bit of a mediator in this conflict, to really help, draw down tension, not ratchet it up. And unfortunately, the opposite happened. Obviously, we saw the Arab leaders failed to meet. He was supposed to go to Israel, and then following that, do a summit with Arab leaders to help again really bring down the tensions in the region, they canceled on him, which is extraordinarily embarrassing for our
Yes.
country and certainly for the president of the United States to have these meetings canceled while he's basically boarding his flight to go there for the meetings. So his kind of role as mediator was clearly, unfortunately, a failure, and really didn't do much to draw down or kind of tamp down the flames in the region. So it's extraordinarily unfortunate. And to your point about the $100 million that we're releasing, I think it's important that we also even step back further and get a little bit further back and talk about the $6 billion,
Right.
which is a portion of all of this, which is we are not being good custodians of the money that is going overseas and to who it's going to.
Well,
And
and
so,
let's back up for those
yeah,
who don't know the $6 billion Meaghan just referenced. This was a part of a hostages trade. So
correct.
money for hostages. So we got a lot of hostages. I don't even remember how many, five hostages
Five.
for $6 billion in this cash held at Qatar. They claim that, well, they can't get it. And yet have they refrozen that money? But again, the question here is, how that money was to Iran. We know Iran funds Hamas. We know that they were likely, and I don't want to say with certainty, but it looks like Iran was involved in this or may have funded this. So you're right. We need to talk about that. Have they refrozen that money? Frankly, I hate that word refrozen. Just never give it to them. What's the status of that money? And Ellie, feel free to and Qanta, feel free to jump in here if you have comments.
And so,
Sure. Well,
go ahead, Ellie.
Oh,
I'll let you
sorry.
jump in.
Okay.
No, you're fine.
You know, the Iranian role, I think it's a great jumping point right now to kind of talk about that. So the fact that there seems to be any question around the Iranian connection to Hamas, I think there are a lot of people who are trying to gaslight the American people on this subject. So the Islamic Republic of Iran has, I would argue, had a very successful strategy of funding, training, and arming terror proxies throughout the region, specifically to encircle Israel. So you've got Hamas in Gaza, you've got Hezbollah in Lebanon, you've got Iranian boots on the ground in Syria, and you've got Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, you have Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, and you've got the Houthis in Yemen. So you're talking about this encirclement of Israel. And so the Islamic Republic has found this to be a very successful strategy for itself because it has been the patron state of these terror proxies. It has consistently had its proxies attack Israel. And at the same time, because it uses its proxies to do its dirty work, it has managed to secure the Iranian homeland against direct retaliation. So their strategy makes a lot of sense. But the notion that we would somehow see any of this activity as not related to the Islamic Republic is ludicrous. And so regarding the funding of the Islamic Republic and the economy of Iran right now, during the Trump administration and the maximum pressure campaign, the strongest sanctions campaign in history, the Islamic Republic was very much suffering. And at the end of the Trump term, the IMF reported that the Islamic Republic had access to only $4 billion accessible foreign currency reserves at the time. Fast forward to where we are today, this administration unfortunately did not enforce the oil sanctions on Iran, and so Iran has been able to make sales to China of its oil.
Yes.
And so the regime is now $80 billion richer. And the U.S. has confirmed that Iran gives its terror proxies $1 billion a year. So this $6 billion, Meaghan, that was supposedly as part of this hostage exchange, which sits right now in Qatar. This $6 billion is almost like the cherry on top of the $80 billion that they've already made over the past few years under this administration. And I would say the latest that we've heard was the Biden administration told us that these funds, the $6 billion specifically, were frozen. And then the Qataris said, no, we are not freezing the funds. So this is, I guess, a developing story of whether our administration will be able to stand strong against Qatar and make sure that these funds are not released, because we know that the Islamic Republic will use it to fund its nuclear activity and its terror proxy activity.
Well, and Ellie, to your point, I just want to reemphasize, actually, we have zero authority to freeze those funds. We forfeited that authority when we ceded control to Qatar. So the second that we released the sanctions, the second it left South Korea, moved to Qatar, we lost any ability to control those fundings. So all we effectively have is a non-enforceable agreement with Iran's closest ally, Qatar. So we have no authority. We've already given it up at this point. And at this point, to your what you were saying earlier, that money can just be moved around. So even if we are tracking that $6 billion, as the administration is currently trying to say, or that they have some type of oversight authority on it, doesn't really matter because extra money from Qatar can go there regardless. So that $6 billion is, who knows, it's in the wind now. There's nothing that the United States can do.
Well, there has been, obviously the Biden administration is quick to pounce, as the media loves to say, pounce on claims that this money is fungible or that that they're even accessing this money. And they say that there's all of these sort of barriers in place and checks and monitors in place if this money is accessed by Qatar. How confident are you? And anyone can answer this. How confident are you that those checks will actually work to prevent Iran from getting that? And again, Ellie, I maybe this is a silly question in light of the crude oil they're pumping out and selling into the marketplace, mainly to China, because it's much less. But still, Meaghan or Ellie or Qanta, how confident are you that they will not be able to access that money?
If I'm going to just jump in, if I may, because I agree with everything that's been said. There's been enormous amounts of publicity about the $6 billion, but it's also factual that Iran signed a 25-year deal with Venezuela, I think almost a year ago, to handle the crude and to provide Iranian engineering refining skills to Venezuela. And China has announced, I think, a $450 billion investment in Iran. And that was announced at the same time as a peace agreement or détente between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So we are facing an enormous adversary in Iran. And the discussion with Meaghan and Ellie is exactly what I have understood. The only thing that I saw just as I was leaving New York is now the engagement of U.S. targets by Iranian militia inside Iraq. And Iraq is also a proxy annexation of Iran in service of its bellicose ambitions. So this is so much bigger than the $6 billion for the 6 hostages that were repatriated, which puts America in a terrible position. One of the things I'm wondering about, if we do have an opportunity to save innocent lives that are held hostage now, is that a factor in the calculations? And that's what I'd ask Meaghan and Ellie. And I also think just arriving here on the flight, I'm astounded at how many flight attendants and at the end, even the captains talk to me about their disbelief as to what has happened here in Israel. And also that the world is still looking at it through the traditional lens of an Israeli conflict with Hamas or an Israeli conflict with Hezbollah, instead of recognizing this event is something that the entire world is going to reconfigure around. It will not be like antebellum anymore. And so I almost worry that the United States is getting lost in its old imagination of somehow diffusing tensions, which I think is important, mitigating humanitarian catastrophes, which is important, but not realizing the massive alignment of forces with Iran, Russia, North Korea, and flow of capital. That's what I'm worried about.
Qanta, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think to also bring it to the topic about how this war is going to affect U.S. foreign policy going forward. So Qanta, really very much to your point, I think that we are at a very dangerous moment in history. I can say certainly from what's happening on the Israeli side of it, Israel is probably at its most vulnerable that it's been in the last 50 years since the 1972 Yom Kippur War, which was also a surprise attack on Israel. The Israelis have taken a tremendous amount of casualties in this surprise attack, both on the civilians and on the IDF. It's taking them some time to kind of regroup and prepare themselves for what we all believe is an inevitable ground invasion in Gaza. And while that's happening, they are also preparing themselves for the potential of Hezbollah attacking Israel from the north. And meanwhile, Hezbollah has over 100,000 rockets, including precision guided missiles, which are much more, as the name would suggest, precise than what Hamas's capability is. And so until now, the belief was that the Islamic Republic was kind of keeping the Hezbollah capability as its safety guarantee, meaning that it was a way to prevent Israel. The notion was that should Israel attack Iran's nuclear facilities, that Hezbollah would then retaliate against Israel. And so it was always believed that that the Iranians were holding Hezbollah for that reason. But as this war is developing, we're seeing more. I mean, even today, we're seeing more and more skirmishes happening on the north. I heard from friends in Israel that there were sirens and rocket attacks from the north today. So I think that there is a distinct possibility that the U.S. might have to get involved should Israel find itself in a multi-front war. And so I really want to echo Qanta's sentiment that we're in something very new right now. And without a doubt, there is the invisible forces right now of China and Russia behind this war. We may not be seeing them, but they are definitely there. And so, we are definitely at a very important moment of reflection for the American public right now of how we want to move forward. And I just want to say one more thing. I don't mean to monopolize, but I'm just so inspired by the American people, because all the polling I've seen is that there is vast majority support for Israel. And I think that the American people really understand that this is truly a fight of good versus evil right now.
Yes, the polling, indeed, that's a very good point, Ellie. The polling is one of the few, when you see the squad out there and people like Cori Bush and obviously Rashida Tlaib inciting violence and inciting these insane rallies. It is comforting to look at that polling, which shows that side is not winning. And you're right, it is a war of good and evil. Meaghan, I wanted to ask if you have anything to add before I go to some of our member questions, because ultimately we do want to hear from people who follow IWF and members of IWN. So anything to add on this subject, on the idea that it could turn into a global, it could end up into a more global war, frankly.
Absolutely could. I think that the potential here for more than just a regional conflict is substantial for all the reasons that Dr. Ahmed and Ellie mentioned, that it's not just Iran that's involved here, right? You have all of them. You had Putin with Xi in China earlier this week. There's certainly that at play as well. So I think the concern genuinely that this is more than just a regional conflict, but could be a precursor to something much larger it's a very worthwhile point to consider. I mean, I think the thing that we're doing right now, kind of back to President Biden's visit, is we actually are trying to project a substantial amount of power. So we don't just have the USS Gerald Ford there now, we're moving an entire carrier group. And that is very significant. And when we talk about the USS Ford, let me make sure we understand what that means. That is the best in class aircraft carrier that we have. It is worth more. It's a $13 billion aircraft carrier, which is more than most people's Ministry of Defense budgets in their nations. It is huge. We're talking about over 75 aircraft, F-35s, F-15, F-16s, A-10s, anti-aircraft missiles, surface-to-air missiles. It is a literal floating, like a massive amount of hardware and equipment and capability, plus the 5,000 soldiers on it. We're clearly mobilizing 2,000 Marines right now as logisticians, as medical support. That's obviously happening. And then we currently have special operators on the ground that are providing advice and insight and planning purposes with the Israelis. So what we are doing right is we are demonstrating our capacity for waging war and projecting that strength. And that deterrence is what I think is going to be extremely important moving forward and something we have to watch.
Thank you. I'm going to go over to some member questions. This is from Enrica Carmeniti. She asks, How can you stop an administration that is totally left wing, that has a totally left wing agenda from, I'm sorry, this is, and carrying on funneling billions to Hamas, um, the terror wing of the Muslim Brotherhood and Iranian backed regime, while President Trump successfully stopped the flow of money? So that's a great question. How do we stop this administration from continuing to fund these terrorists? I'll start with, I guess I should call on somebody. Ellie, what are your thoughts on this?
The administration did actually announce new sanctions against Iran yesterday. The problem is that it's what I outlined earlier, which is that the oil sanctions were not being enforced to date, and so sanctions take time until they're effective. So we're going to have this gap, and frankly, I'm not exactly sure how to address the issue, other than I think that the American people need to speak up and really continue to voice their support for Israel, and also voice their opinions that we don't want our taxpayer dollars spent to fund terrorism.
Meaghan or Qanta, have any thoughts there? All right, I'll move on. I feel as though the West, especially the US, is falling right into a well thought out and executed plan by Hamas and their enablers and masters. I'm so sorry. This is very difficult to read. I feel like the US is weak and ill-prepared for war thanks to the Biden facade and his masters. It's hard not to believe our lives will soon be altered. What is on the horizon? Thoughts on this?
So I think the reality, Julie, is unfortunately our lives have already been altered. And I think this goes further back again. Like, I think we need to take a step back. And this is just one more domino that's fallen in some really significant failed foreign policy, starting with the withdrawal of Afghanistan, continuing with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and now this kind of third massive event that's occurring. And all of that is driving also so much of what's happening in our daily lives. So inflation was already astronomically high prior. The war in Ukraine brought it even higher, kind of contributing to global food insecurity, driving energy prices up. So we're already seeing the consequences of all of that. So our lives actually have already been significantly changed. I think this is why it's so imperative, and what we talk about so often is that we have to take this knowledge and then translate it to action. And what that means is being very informed on the issues, understanding the role that policy plays, the reality that national security and foreign policy, those are kitchen table issues now. They used to be relegated kind of outside of that. They weren't really something that we thought would impact women or families or the home life. But the reality is it's here. So we need to really make sure that we're informed on these issues. So when it comes time and we can have our voice be heard, whether it's the ballot box or calling our representatives, that we can do so.
Thank you. This is a question from Philip Jones. How can we convince the US government to deport Americans who defend this genocidal group, Hamas? And I think I want to expand on that question, because I too am very confused about how you, I don't know if, the coverage of the people walking in the street and saying, gas the Jews and death to the Jews. If these people are in fact, this is happening, a lot of this is happening on US campuses, if these are foreign students who are not American students, they should go home. There is no reason to have that kind of garbage at our universities. And that is dangerous. That is inciting violence. That is wanting the death of Jews. I mean, they're very clear. They're very clear while they're marching. They're not trying to hide anything. I'm confused, and obviously Philip is here too. Why isn't that an automatic thing? How can we encourage that? I mean, I kind of say, oh, well, write to your Congress. We don't even have a speaker. So I don't know what Congress is going to do at this point. But is this just, is this a university process or a university policy that needs to be addressed? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Julie, I'm going to jump in on this. It's such an important question. I do know, for just as a fact, Hamas is a United States designated foreign terrorist organization. So I do know that there were members of Congress, and I'm not exactly sure it was either Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz. So I hope maybe somebody in the audience might be able to look that up. But there were members who were saying that we actually have existing laws on the books about not it being illegal to support terrorist organizations, and that in fact we do have laws on the books that that anyone who does support FTOs can be deported from this country. So I think we need to see our laws enforced. But on the other subject, Julie, that you raised about what's going on our college campuses, I have to tell you, as an American Jew, it's devastating to me. Honestly, it's just devastating to see this letter from Harvard students where they're blaming the atrocities that were committed against the Jewish people on the Jewish people. This outrageous victim blaming that's going on. And this is something that we're seeing across our most elite universities all across the country. The fact that after they have seen with their own eyes atrocities which Hamas videotaped themselves with their GoPro cameras and shared it with the world because they're proud of what they have done to their innocent Jewish victims. And the fact that these kids saw this footage and still came out to support Hamas and still are slandering Israel, this is just so concerning for me as I think about our children and grandchildren and what is the world they're going to be inheriting. And who are these people who are at our universities and they're graduating into power, and so I think we have a lot of work ahead of us.
We do.
To try to educate. I mean, I just don't know what else to say, to try to educate, and really I have to be honest about this. They are the classic idiots. They're the classic
useful idiots.
Useful idiots, exactly. The useful idiots of the radical Islamists who, as soon as they would get their hands on kids like our college students, would do exactly what they did to those kids at the music festival in Israel. I look at the kids who were at that music festival, people in their 20s mostly. They were at this festival for peace. And look at the atrocities. I mean, it just hurts me to talk about it. The rape of the women, the burning people alive, the murdering people. I mean, it just the list goes on. And those kids at that music festival, I think to me are just exactly like the kids on our college campuses. How do they not relate to those kids in Israel and understand that this radical Islamist force is out to destroy everything about us and what we stand for? So I just I'm kind of just like beyond myself right now.
Me too.
Seeing this.
Me too. And Ellie, what's so interesting, Meaghan, you can also, I'd love your thoughts on this. It is so bizarre when you consider that this is the most online generation. These college kids are part of the most online. They are used to living their lives publicly, and they're able to access evidence quickly. And there is actual evidence. You mentioned the GoPros, okay? You mentioned that, I mean, the picture of that woman getting out of a truck and her entire bottom half is bloodied, and you know what they've been doing to this poor woman. There is incredible amounts of evidence of what has happened, and to see these kids who know how to access it, every one of them is walking around with an iPhone, and yet to deny it, it is so disturbing. Of course, during the Holocaust, there were denials, and they were all horrible, but in some, you can actually say some people didn't have evidence. It took a while. The Germans were hiding what they had done. They didn't want that out. They knew it was bad, right? They inherently knew it was bad. Here, you literally have Hamas providing people with a video, and you still get these denials. It's horrifying. And Ellie, I'm with you. I mean, I don't quite know how to process the horror of both what we've seen happen to those poor people in Israel, but also then the denials and the rallies. It's really sickening. Meaghan, I'd like to talk a little bit further about that. I'm going to get back to the member questions, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about the squad, Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, AOC. We know who they are, and they are joining in on this. And in fact, Rashida Tlaib is now, she is absolutely a vessel of misinformation. She still has her tweet up, which accuses the Israelis of bombing a hospital. We all know, everybody knows, everybody's walked that back, right? And it was horrible how the media immediately jumped on that. But what can Congress do? Look, I know they can, there's a few things if they get a speaker they can do. But what else can be done about members like this censuring? But what also needs to be done in her district to educate the people of her district because they put her there?
I did put her there, and I think that is, and I think the really unfortunate about part of all of this, Julie, is what you mentioned, which is actually these folks that are really being mouthpieces for Hamas right now are actually referencing our own media because our own media made the mistake, the New York Times, the Associated Press,
Yep.
and so now they're able to kind of cover under that and say, oh, well, we were just going off of what the paper of record said, and so they've allowed themselves to have cover now. So there's a little, it's not as strong as if there wasn't the media doing that work for them. So I don't know what we can really do other than, again, I think a huge education campaign needs to happen. But I want to do reference for something you said earlier about social media, which is, yes, this generation is very online. The problem is everything we consume is driven by algorithms. So you're kind of existing in your own silo. So if you aren't following certain accounts or you're not exposed to that information, you're just never going to see it, which is
Yeah.
an extraordinarily dangerous part of social media because that algorithm then will funnel like content to
Yes.
you. So then
Yes.
you're only seeing reinforced like belief system, or you're getting your belief system reinforced by things that adhere to your belief system. So you're not being cognitively challenged. You're not engaging with different ideas. You're actually just getting the same thing fed to you repeatedly because ultimately social media is driven by time on the app, which is driven by ad dollars. And so what it wants you to do is use that product more. So it's going to engage with you in a way that it thinks you want to be engaged by giving you more of that information. So the problem is they may not even be seeing it. But our universities have a responsibility of helping those students become engaged with that material, which is back to the earlier point that Ellie made, where they're failing. My only hope is that now dollars are talking, right? You're beginning to see major dollar donors
Yes.
to some of these Ivy League universities say, I was already worried. I'm beyond worried now. I'm pulling my money. And we're talking about not small, we're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. These donors are saying, absolutely not. We're done because this is not acceptable in America, and it's certainly not acceptable in institutions that allege they privilege free speech and safety and
Well,
engaging with different ideas.
what is so interesting to me is these universities have employed DEI practices for years and years, and we are seeing it come home to roost because what DEI teaches you is that there is an oppressed class and an oppressor class. And for so often, Israel is seen as the oppressor of the Palestinian people. And so they have put this international situation into a DEI framework. And without looking, they don't look at the evidence, they don't care because they put it in this DEI framework. And now we're pushing DEI even younger, right? K through 12. So we're in for a generational mess here because these kids, we see it in college already, but we have kids who have been just saturated in the CRT DEI stuff, and they're coming up. And again, I mean, this next generation. So yes, I think education is part of it. And I think getting rid of some of these DEI programs at the university, this is what, I mean, I'm really glad that John Huntsman and some of these other wealthy people are pulling their money, but I'm sure you're with me when I say, thanks for finally waking up, guys. Like, it's kind of been a problem for years.
Yeah, it's a little late. Yeah.
It's a little late. So let's go on. Oh, go ahead.
By the
Go
way,
ahead.
I do want to add also, and I appreciate that we're talking about the donors who are pulling their money. I also want to give credit to Bill Ackman,
Yes.
very significant hedge fund manager in New York, who he started this, I think, really the pushback against the universities when he demanded from Harvard a list of the students who had signed on to that letter which condemned
Yes.
Israel for the atrocities.
Yes.
And what he did was he organized business leaders and said that we want the names of these students because we want to make sure we don't inadvertently hire any of them.
Right.
Well, the minute that Bill Ackman did this, a number of the student groups retracted their signatures from that letter. Unfortunately, not all of them, but I'm raising this also. Davis Polk, a law firm in New York, also rescinded letters of employment to a number of students that had issued statements in support of Hamas. So I do want to say also that this is also, I think, a really important topic to really understand that the business and corporate world does have the ability to turn the tide. And this is exactly what we need to see. We need to see the corporate world stand up now and really let the young people who are are coming into the career world, let them know that this is just unacceptable
It's
for
unacceptable.
them. So
It's unacceptable. And what I love though, Ellie, I got to say, I love the reaction from some of the students. They literally tried to jump on the cancellation bandwagon, right? Saying they're canceled. And I'm like, no. When you sign your name to something, that's not cancellation. That's not someone hunting you down and doxing you. You've actually signed your name to a document that allies with a terrorist organization. So, and my other funniest story is related to this is I have never purchased a Joe Malone candle. Do you all have Joe Malone candles? Well, her son, Joe Malone, very famous candle maker, kind of, wealthy candles. Candles wealthy people buy, right? I buy them from TJ Maxx. But her son was one of the Harvard students who signed this letter. So I hope he enjoys his job at Joe Malone candle making, because I don't know that he will get a job anywhere else. So that is like a happy story related to this. But moving on, I have another member question. This is John K. He says, why isn't the administration holding Iran responsible? As a casual observer, it seems obvious who's behind this. The U.S. seems to have taken such a soft stance on Iran that we're practically inviting Iran to cause trouble. Will we reestablish enforcement of sanctions, refreeze success? So we've already kind of covered this, but it is, but because he asked about the refreezing the money, but his earlier question is, there is a little bit of soft pedaling on Iran. I imagine, and I actually hate this word now because people are saying it about Israel, like, oh, it's complex. But the Iran issue is complex. And how do you feel about the administration sort of pussyfooting around the Iran question?
Meaghan, do you mind if I go first on this?
No, go right ahead, Ellie.
Julie, one of the news stories that broke out just before this attack on Israel was that there was basically an Iranian operation, an influence operation that was exposed. And so what we found out was that there were people who currently work for the Pentagon, formerly in Department of State, brought in by Robert Malley, who was the Biden administration's Iran envoy and who's currently being investigated for some sort of security breach. That these people were part of this Iranian influence operation, and so we've been waiting to see how this would unfold. Ariana Tabatabaei, who I can tell you that when she was first announced that she was being, she was going to be joining the administration, from that moment that her name came out, I and Iranian Americans all across the country immediately started to voice concern, because we all know, this is just public information, that her father is very closely linked to the Islamic Republic regime. And so this is just such easily available information. We all raised our voices. And at the time, do you know what they said, the administration? They said that this was like racism, Islamophobia, whatever. And it's just such nonsense, because all the people practically who were voicing concern over Tabatabaei's appointment or other Iranian Muslims.
Wow.
Okay. So these are people who just know who she is. They know Iran. There are people like myself who had to flee the country. And, we know who's affiliated with the regime and who's not affiliated with the regime. And her family is affiliated with the regime. So, all of our jaws were dropped open when they said that she's now a part of the Biden administration.
Unbelievable.
Well, fast forward, fast forward to today, and then we find out, hey, actually, you know what? She actually did email the foreign minister of Iran a number of times to ask his permission, in essence, to go do things and to participate. And she's been in touch with, intelligence operatives in Iran. And so what's astounding to me, though, Julie, is that even just yesterday, I saw a report, Adam Credo, Washington Free Beacon, he was told that her security clearance is still not pulled. She's still employed by the Pentagon.
Wow.
And who can explain it?
Who can explain it is right. The call is coming from inside the house. This is just horrifying. I've also seen news that there is an official at DHS who actually I think she tweeted or Instagrammed a picture of a paraglider, and her support of Hamas. I mean, this stuff is what, and she's at the Department of Homeland Security in not a low position. She actually got a promotion last year. I don't have her name in front of me, but you're right. We can't really expect the Biden administration to act harshly towards Iran if there are Iranian sympathizers throughout the administration. It's extremely disappointing. Meaghan, do you have anything to add to that, or can I go on to another question? We have a couple more questions.
Of course, I think just one thing I wanted to touch on, which is I think something that cuts across a lot of these different issues, is that they are very good, and by they I mean really those who are on the left are very good at taking compassionate phrases and phrasing them as something else, right?
Yep.
It's Islamophobia, it's repression, it's oppression, it's all of these things, violence, right? Your words are violence.
And they don't just do it with this. I mean, gender affirming care sounds nice too.
Right. Of course, right. It's everything. And so
Right.
they have taken, so very well-intentioned, compassionate people hear those words, and they're obviously emotion-laden words and are going to have a natural reaction. So they're hijacking our own like humanity and compassion against us, which I think is extraordinarily dangerous. And to your point earlier, Julie, about DEI, all of that's coming home to roost now. And that's coming home to roost on across a variety of different issues, to your point. But I think it's important that we have to be so careful when we talk about the rhetoric that they're using, because it does box people into a corner where they feel like they have to both sides the perspective, because they're like, well, of course I don't want people to be, bombed over here. They're innocents too, right? And so really, that's why I think it's so important that we are very informed about the issues, right? And separating Hamas from Palestinians, and then understanding too, though, the process by which Palestinians have, been kind of forced into electing Hamas to be in charge of them, right? So really making sure that we're informed on the issues, and very much not letting this kind of compassion-driven rhetoric drive our decisions or feel like it forces us into a box.
Ladies, it's unfortunate that we're coming up on the end here. I have one more question, and I think it's a fitting question. But I do hope that we can do this again. I think that this is, as Meaghan and I were emailing before this, and Meaghan said, I think it's very, very important that we express that there's a lot yet to learn about the situation. And so I hope we can repeat, have another conversation like this. We have just, I am so grateful to work with women like you and Qanta to help explain and make sense of a situation that makes very little sense. So first, thank you both. But I'm going to end on this last question. This is from Andrea Lipper. She says, the brutal and barbaric acts of cruelty by Hamas was the most horrific day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. What can good people do to support the Jewish people, who are a tiny population in a tiny country? What suggestions would you give? Lots of listeners here now, and I know all of them are eager to help the Jewish people, both in Israel and here in the United States.
I have a few on that. First of all, I'm so grateful to Andrea for asking the question. So, I would say that I'm so grateful to Independent Women's Forum for bringing me on as a senior fellow, for having this kind of conversation. I've seen on IWF social media how you have consistently, expressed support towards Israel. And so, so first of all, I think to support the institutions and the organizations that are doing the right thing, and IWF certainly does. And again, I'm just so proud to be an IWF fellow. And I would say also to Andrea, we definitely need support to our members of Congress. We need to get our voices heard in terms of legislation, in terms of taking action, definitely as 2024 heats up, whoever your candidate is, to make sure that they continue to pay attention to issues of rising anti-Semitism and support for Israel. The other thing I would say is, it might seem like a small thing, but also expressing your personal support on social media. Just putting up a little graphic on your own social media. I stand with Israel. It means a lot. It helps. It helps, I think, to express the silent majority, which I think we discussed earlier. The silent majority in this country is supportive of Israel, understands that Israel's on the front lines of civilization, that they come first for the Saturday people, then they'll come for the Sunday people. And so, it just to make sure that each individual is expressing their personal support. The last thing I'll say is that, unfortunately, we see just, again, a rise of anti-Semitic incidents and attacks all across the country. And so when something happens in your local community, if something does happen in your local community, if there are gatherings that are meant to support the local Jewish community, I think if friends and families and neighbors come out in support, so if you're not Jewish but you go to a pro-Israel rally, or you go to a vigil or something that happens after an attack, that also means the world, because the Jews internationally were very small in numbers, and so we definitely need all the support we can get.
Meaghan?
I think Ellie hit it perfectly.
All right. Ladies, I really do appreciate you all coming on here and explaining again this very complex issue. I hope we can do it again. Before I say goodbye, can you give your social media account so people can follow you?
Sure. So I'm at Ellie Kohanim. I know it's a long name. It's just like you have it on the screen, ELLIECOHANIM at Ellie Kohanim. And I am on everything. I'm on Twitter mostly, but a little bit on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Meaghan?
And then I'm at Mobs Mentality. So MOBBS_mentality.
Okay, great. Thank you, ladies, again, and thank you all for joining us today. If you aren't already a member of IWN, I encourage you to join today. We have lots of great conversation. IWN engages multiple policy issues that enhance people's freedoms, opportunities, and well-being. Plus, members gain access to our regular programming and other informative resources like the one we had today. Thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Julie.